Deep beneath the mountains, a single dwarf prepares to speak of a lost kingdom. I am Bafar, a Lormaster of my people, and I have chosen to break a long silence. We carry the story of Khazad-dûm not as a wound, but as a duty, a treasure of memory that must be passed on. By the end of this tale, you will understand the full weight of dwarven history, from its glorious dawn to its quiet echoes. We will explore why a place of such immense power could be abandoned, and what ancient shadow waits in its deepest halls. I invite you to settle in and feel the profound peace of this ancient narrative. Wherever you are in the world right now, and whatever the hour, I hope this story finds you ready to rest. What is lost can still teach us how to find peace. Can it not? The first sound was not a shout of triumph, but the patient, rhythmic strike of steel against stone. Durin the Deathless, eldest of the fathers of the dwarves, stood not as a conqueror, but as a listener. He had found the lake called Khazad-dûm, the mirror, and in its star-reflecting depths, he saw more than his own crowned image. He saw a vision of a crown of stars, a hall of endless pillars, and a lineage stretching into the distant future. It was here, before this silent water, that he chose the mountain. He would not merely dwell within it, he would command his people to unmake it from within, to carve a kingdom from its granite heart, and so the great labor began. The mountain fought them with every inch. Freshly cut tunnels groaned and collapsed without warning, swallowing tools and hopes. Unstable rock faces sheared away under the bite of their picks. Yet the Longbeard dwarves, our ancestors, did not yield. Their resolve was as unyielding as the stone they sought to master. With each setback, they delved deeper, their unwavering determination, a force as tangible as their hammers. Durin's decision, in those early days, defined our people for all time. He decreed they would build not a simple mine or a fortified outpost, but a city of impossible scale. A realm of grand avenues, throne rooms, and forges that would echo with industry for thousands of years. The stakes for our clan could not have been higher. Failure meant a slow fading, a nomadic existence in the harsh wilds, but success promised a home that would endure, a legacy of craft, and a power rooted deep in the bones of the world. This was the birth of our longing, our ambition, our profound bond with the earth. It was a covenant written not on parchment, but in the very foundations of the world. And as those foundational halls took shape, the true wealth of the mountain began to reveal itself. Then came the day a pickaxe, swung in the deep dark beneath Khazad-dûm, struck not common stone, but a vein of living light. It was a silver that seemed to drink the lamplight and give it back 100-fold, a metal that felt cool and impossibly light in a dwarf's calloused hand. This was Mithril, true silver, a substance lighter than silk, yet harder than tempered steel. The discovery sent a shockwave of euphoria through the entire kingdom. In that single moment, Khazad-dûm was transformed from a mighty dwarven stronghold into the undisputed treasure house of the world. Forges that had once produced fine arms and tools now dedicated themselves to crafting wonders. They wove mithril into mail that could turn any blade, shaped it into goblets that never tarnished, and hammered it into gates that gleamed with a soft inner moon. Our wealth became legendary, drawing traders, artisans, and envoys from every corner of Middle-earth, all eager for a glimpse of the glory that shone from the deep places of the world. Yet this glorious ascent was built upon a foundation of growing unease. The richest seams of Mithril were always found lower, in the deepest and oldest roots of the mountain. The further down the miners delved, the more the air itself seemed to change, growing heavy and still, as if the very stone was holding its breath. Old tales, long dismissed as fireside fancies, began to be whispered again in the quieter halls. They spoke of the deep places being claimed in ages past, of shadows that did not flee from torchlight. The initial joy of discovery was slowly tempered by a quiet dread, a sense that in their search for treasure, they were disturbing a slumber that should have remained eternal. Faced with this unease, the ruling lords of the city made a fateful choice. The wealth and power that Mithril brought were too intoxicating, too vital to the kingdom's newfound status, to simply abandon. They chose to mine the precious metal relentlessly, prioritizing its immense value over the whispered warnings from the depths. This decision bound the fate of Khazad-dûm irrevocably to the glittering ore. The kingdom's fortune, its renown, its very identity, became dependent on an endeavor that grew more perilous with every passing season. The relentless pursuit of treasure drove the delves ever downward, into realms untouched by light, where the only sound was the steady, echoing ring of dwarven picks and the silent, waiting darkness beyond. The symphony of creation within the forges of Khazad-dûm was a sound to rival the greatest music of the world. Master smiths, their hands guided by generations of skill, coaxed the Mithril into forms of breathtaking function and beauty. They developed Ithildin, a metal that held the light of moon and stars, and with it, they forged the great doors that would become the Western Gate. These were no mere barriers of defense, but a star map of celestial patterns that would only appear under starlight, a testament to dwarven artistry and a gesture of friendship to the elf lord Celebrimbor. They hammered the first mithril coats, shirts of mail so fine they could be worn unseen beneath a tunic, yet so strong no blade could pierce them. The works of Khazad-dûm became the most coveted treasures of the age, sought by elven kings and human lords who offered riches and alliances in exchange for a single piece of dwarven craft. This cemented the kingdom's dominance, a golden age where its cultural influence was as unshakable as its stone pillars. But this very success bred a quiet, internal conflict. A rift grew between the artisan smiths, who saw their work as a sacred act of creation, meant to echo through the ages, and the minor lords, who viewed the forges as engines of pure commerce, a means to fund ever deeper and more dangerous excavations. The soul of the craft was at odds with its staggering market value. In an attempt to balance these pressures, the ruling smith lords made a momentous choice. They agreed to trade certain finished goods, like the legendary weapons and starlit doors, but they swore to guard the deepest secrets of mithril work and their most powerful creations. This diplomacy built powerful alliances and brought immense wealth, but it also risked the very uniqueness of their craft, exposing their greatest works to the envy of lesser kingdoms. The security of Khazad-dûm became intertwined with these artifacts. Its gates, its armor, its very reputation were now shields against the outside world, making the kingdom and its wonders a glittering prize for any who might covet it. Yet, for all its glittering achievements, the heart of the mountain grew silent and watchful. A shadow then fell upon the world beyond the mountain, a creeping sickness that withered fields and emptied kingdoms. This was the Great Plague, a wave of illness that swept through Middle-earth, sparing neither the great cities of men nor the hidden valleys of the elves. From their high stone halls, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm watched in grim silence as the trade caravans from the east ceased their journeys, and the echoes from their allied realms fell quiet. The world outside was suffering a terrible hardship, and a difficult choice had to be made. Fear of the sickness reaching their tightly packed halls warred with a deep-seated duty to their neighbors and the ancient alliances that had sustained them for centuries. Could they truly shut their gates on the world in its time of need? The debate raged in the council chambers, a clash not of weapons, but of philosophies. One faction, the traditionalists, saw the plague as an external menace with no place in their ordered stone world. They argued that their primary duty was to the lives within the mountain, that sealing the Great East Gate was the only way to ensure the survival of their entire people. To them, the rich trade and cultural exchange were luxuries that could be resumed once the danger had passed. Opposing them were those who saw isolation as a different kind of death. They warned that cutting themselves off would lead to stagnation, that a kingdom which turned entirely inward would forget the wider world and be forgotten by it. They feared the loss of knowledge, of new ideas, and the slow erosion of the friendships that had made Khazad-dûm a central pillar of Middle-earth, not just a remote fortress. In the end, the weight of a king's responsibility settled the matter. King Durin VI made the fateful decree. The massive East Gate, through which the wealth of nations had once flowed, was sealed. Great blocks of stone were set in place, and the intricate mechanisms that had once welcomed allies were locked for the first time in memory. The immediate effect was one of profound relief. The plague did not breach their defenses, and countless dwarven lives were indeed saved, but the cost was a quiet, lingering sorrow. The vibrant connections to the outside world were severed. The flow of new stories, strange ores, and foreign crafts ceased. The horizons of the kingdom, once vast and open, now shrank to the measure of their own caverns and halls. Isolated and secure within their stone sanctuary, the dwarves turned their attention back to the one pursuit that never failed them, the deep, resonant call of the mine. The upper veins of Mithril finally ran dry, leaving only echoes in the worked-out caverns. A deep silence began to reclaim those once bustling levels, a quiet that felt heavier than the mountain itself. Driven by this scarcity and the king's own command, the miners had no choice but to venture down, past the last marked pillars and into the deep dark that lay beneath the very roots of the mountains. This was a place untouched by any forged light, a realm of ancient stone that had known only an eternal, undisturbed peace. The air grew thick and still, and the warmth of the upper forges was a distant memory. Here, the only sound was the frantic rhythm of their own hearts, a drumbeat of ambition, warring with a deep, primal fear. The foreman of this deep dig, a dwarf named Balin, felt this conflict more keenly than any other. He was a miner of the old school, raised on the whispered tales of what might dwell in the world's foundations. He argued for caution, for reinforcing their new tunnels, and proceeding with the reverence such a place demanded. But the decree from King Durin VI was absolute, delivered from the well-lit throne room far above. Find more Mithril at any cost. The kingdom's economy, the personal fortunes of its lords, and the very prestige of the crown were now bound to the success of this desperate delve. Every swing of the pick was a gamble, placing the fleeting promise of wealth against the existential safety of the entire realm. The miners pressed on, their lamps pushing back a darkness that seemed to push back. Then one day, the echoes from the deep dig changed. The familiar, clean ring of steel on stone was replaced by a different sound, a hollow, resonant thud that seemed to come from a vast, empty space beyond the rock face. It was a sound that promised a great cavern, perhaps the mother lode of all mithril seams, but it was also a sound that carried a palpable chill, a silence that felt less like an absence and more like a presence, now disturbed from its long slumber. A quiet dread began to seep upwards from the depths, a cold mist that had nothing to do with the mountain's chill. The final pick stroke did not strike stone, but a strange, brittle shell that gave way with a sickening crack. For a single, suspended moment, there was only silence and the faint echo of falling rock. Then the darkness before them began to move. It was not a trick of the lamplight. The shadows in the vast, primordial chamber congealed and rose, pulling themselves upward into a form of impossible height, a silhouette of pure night that blotted out the very air. From within that shifting darkness, 2 points of fire ignited, not the warm light of a forge, but the cold, ancient hatred of a star that had fallen from grace. A heat that was not of any natural fire washed over the miners, a dry, suffocating wind that carried the scent of ash and ages long forgotten. This was Durin's bane, the Balrog of Morgoth, a being of shadow and flame that had slept since the first age, and its awakening was an immediate cataclysm. The creature's first movement was a whip of living fire, a lash that cut through the air and extinguished the lives of the nearest dwarves in an instant. Their axes, forged of the finest steel, were as useless as twigs against this demonic power, their legendary courage a fleeting spark before an inferno. The conflict was not one of strength or strategy, but of mortal will against a force that had shaped the nightmares of the world's dawn. The survivors, their minds reeling from the shock and the searing heat, faced a choice that would define their final moments. To stand and fight was to embrace a certain, fiery end, a sacrifice that would buy no time and achieve nothing. Their only duty, their only possible victory, was to turn and run, to carry a warning up through the winding tunnels to the kingdom above. It was a choice between a meaningless death and a desperate, fleeting chance for others to live. The stakes of a simple mining accident had vanished, replaced by the single, overwhelming question of whether any soul in Khazad-dûm would survive the hour. As the few stunned miners scrambled back through the tunnels, the terror followed them, not just as a physical presence, but as a wave of palpable dread that seeped into the very stone. The Balrog began its ascent, a slow, deliberate climb from the deep places, its shadow stretching ahead of it to choke the lantern light from the corridors. And then, from the lower guard posts, the alarm horn sounded. It was a mournful, brazen cry that echoed through the grand halls and royal chambers, a sound that had not been heard in the peace of the kingdom for 1,000 years. King Durin the heard the mournful cry of the alarm horns and knew his kingdom faced its final trial. He was the father of his people, and his duty was as unyielding as the stone around him. Convinced that no creature, no matter how terrible, could withstand the assembled might of his royal guard, he made his choice. He would march to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, the great chasm that spanned the second hall, and there he would make his stand. It was a decision born of courage, but also of a deep-seated pride in the unbroken strength of his line. He believed he could shield his people by personally confronting the shadow that climbed from the deeps. The royal guard, clad in the finest steel and bearing rune-etched axes, formed a wall of grim determination around their king. They moved as one body through the grand avenues, their march a solemn drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. The air grew hot and thick with a scent like charred stone, and the distant echoes were no longer of industry, but of a slow, crushing advance. On the narrow span of the bridge, they met their fate. The Balrog emerged from the stairway, a wave of living shadow that made the very torches flicker and die. Its form was a shifting terror, and the 2 points of fire that were its eyes fixed upon the king. The confrontation was not a battle, but a swift and terrifying end. The creature's whip of flame lashed out, a searing arc that shattered dwarf steel and dwarf bone alike. King Durin fell there, on the bridge that bore his name, becoming the first and most tragic casualty of the Balrog's wrath. His death was more than the loss of a single life. It was the shattering of a 1,000-year lineage. The heart of the dwarven resistance broke in that moment. The morale of his people, which had held firm against countless hardships, crumbled into dust. The king's heroic choice to lead from the front had left his people utterly leaderless in their darkest hour. His duty to protect had clashed with the hubris of believing his royal will alone could command the deep places of the world. This single event transformed a dire crisis into an irreversible downfall. The loss of their ruler was the loss of their era, the end of the golden age of Khazad-dûm. With their king fallen and their hope extinguished, a desperate flight for survival began. The orderly world of Khazad-dûm shattered into chaos. With their king fallen, the chain of command dissolved into a single, primal imperative: escape. The lower halls, once the vibrant heart of the kingdom, became a death trap. Panic spread faster than the fire, as families, artisans, and soldiers alike were swept up in a desperate tide, moving upwards. The few remaining captains, their voices hoarse from shouting over the din, tried to impose some semblance of order, forming a rearguard to shield the fleeing masses. They fought not to win, but to slow the inevitable, a series of brutal, losing battles in narrow side passages and across grand, echoing chambers. Every corridor held a painful choice, every sealed door a final goodbye. The instinct for self-preservation warred with a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow, the agony of leaving behind not just gold and mithril, but the very stones that held their history, the tombs of their ancestors, the forges that had sung with their craft for generations. It was an amputation of the soul. The captains, faces grim with soot and grief, made the most terrible decision of their lives. They drew lots among the warriors to choose who would form the final, sacrificial rearguard. Those chosen knew they would never see the light of the outside world again. Their duty was to buy minutes with their lives, to hold a stairwell or block a tunnel long enough for mothers, children, and the future of their people to scramble ahead. The stakes had collapsed into a single, brutal calculation: survival. Every moment of delay meant more lives lost to the creeping shadow and its suffocating heat, a grim exchange of time for blood. The great East Gate, sealed for an age against a long-forgotten plague, was now their only hope for life. The last defenders at the West Gate understood their final duty. They had heard the echoes of the king's fall and the rising tide of terror from the deeps. Their captain, a grim-faced veteran whose name is now lost to all but the stone, gave the order. There was a hidden mechanism, a great counterweight of stone designed for just such a final defense. With a heavy heart, he commanded his men to release it. The action was one of ultimate sacrifice, for it would seal the demon within, but it would also seal their own fate, trapping them in the darkness with the very horror they sought to contain. The massive stone door, once a starlit marvel of friendship, with the elves groaned and shuddered, then fell with a final, crushing impact. The western entrance was gone, replaced by a solid wall of rubble. Outside, the fleeing survivors heard the last, desperate cries of their kin cut short by the roar of collapsing stone. It was a sound of profound loss, a moment of horrific sacrifice that would echo in the memory of their people for all generations. The captain's terrible choice had saved the elven realm of a region and the wider lands of Middle-earth from the Balrog's immediate rampage, but the cost was the complete and permanent loss of Khazad-dûm. An eerie silence fell over the mountainside, broken only by the weeping of the exiled. They were now a people without a home, standing in the cold light of a world that had suddenly grown much larger and more empty. The survivors stood in the cold light of a world that no longer held their home. They were a broken people, their grand halls and forges now a tomb behind them, their king lost to the fire. A reluctant leader emerged from their ranks, a dwarf named Nain, whose own heart was heavy with the same grief that burdened them all. His first command was not one of conquest, but of simple endurance. He pointed east, toward the distant iron hills, and told them they must walk. Their unity, once as solid as mountain rock, now fractured under the strain of loss. Some wished to linger near the mountains they still loved, while others argued for swift flight. Nain's decision to lead them on a perilous trek was a choice to prioritize survival over sorrow, a gamble that the future of their entire lineage outweighed the pain of the present. The journey was a trial of spirit and body. They were no longer the proud dwellers of Khazad-dûm, but refugees, dependent on the charity of distant kin in smaller, poorer holds. They faced the harsh winds of the high passes and the watchful eyes of wild creatures in the plains below, their numbers slowly dwindling from hardship and skirmish. The internal conflict was a constant companion. Each night, around meager fires, the quiet weeping for lost loved ones and a lost kingdom threatened to extinguish the will to go on. Nain's leadership was not about giving grand speeches, but about the quiet act of lighting the next fire, of ensuring the children were fed, of reminding them with his own stubborn presence that they were still a people, not just a collection of ghosts. The stakes of this long wilderness were absolute. Failure meant more than hunger or a lost battle. It meant the end of their clan's story, their unique crafts and histories fading into the anonymous dust of Middle-earth. Their slow, arduous march became a living memorial, each step a testament to their refusal to be erased. And as they walked, the memory of Khazad-dûm began its slow transformation. Generations passed, and the great kingdom beneath the mountain became a name spoken only in sorrowful legend, a gleaming dream of what was, and a warning of what can be lost. Centuries later, a longing for home refused to be extinguished. The dwarf Lord Balin, once a companion on a great quest, now an elder of Erebor, found the songs of his ancestors echoing in his heart with a persistent call. He gathered a company of bold dwarves, their spirits burning with the same fire, and they set out from the lonely mountain with a singular, audacious goal: to reclaim a fragment of their birthright, to walk the halls of Khazad-dûm once more. Against staggering odds, their initial venture met with a success that must have felt like a blessing from Durin himself. They fought their way through the eastern gates, driving out the scattered orcs and trolls that had infested the upper levels, and for the first time in an age, the echo of dwarven boots rang through the 21st hall. They had done it. They had re-established a dwarf hold in the very heart of their ancestral kingdom. But this victory was fragile, existing within a constant state of siege. The company faced endless, low-level skirmishes with the lingering creatures of the mountain. Every foray for water or exploration was a potential ambush. And beneath these physical threats lay a deeper, more insidious fear, the ever-present psychological weight of the deep darkness below them. They lived and worked in the upper halls, but every dwarf knew they were merely guests in a house with a sealed, terrible basement, a silence beneath their feet that was anything but empty. It was in this atmosphere of defiant hope and simmering dread that Balin made his fateful decision. Filled with pride for what his small band had accomplished, he declared himself Lord of Moria. This was not just a title, it was a statement to the world and a history that the dwarves had returned. It was an act of immense hope, but it also dangerously tempted the same pride that had led his ancestors to delve too deep. The stakes for this small colony were immense. They were fighting for the redemption of their people's honor and the reclamation of a sliver of their lost glory. Yet they were living on borrowed time, their flickering torchlight, a temporary defiance in an ocean of ancient shadow. For 5 years, against all logic, that small flame of dwarf light held in the darkness. The silence of the upper halls was shattered by a tide of crude steel and guttural war cries. The orcs of the Misty Mountains, enraged by the dwarven reclamation, had not been idle. From forgotten side tunnels and deep ventilation shafts, a great force swarmed into the 21st hall, their attack brutally coordinated. The dwarves, caught in the middle of their daily routines, were overwhelmed in the first chaotic moments. The initial defense was a bloody, disjointed struggle, a desperate series of small battles fought in the very workshops and living quarters they had worked so hard to restore. There was no time for a dignified retreat, only a frantic, fighting withdrawal as they were pushed back from the outer halls, leaving behind the bodies of their kin and the fruits of their 5 years of labor. Balin, his face a mask of grim resolve, bellowed the only order that made any sense: fall back to the chamber of Mazarbul. This hall, with its heavy stone door and defensible position, became their final refuge. They barred the entrance, turning the chamber that had once housed the records of kings into a grim fortress. Inside, the air was thick with the sounds of heavy breathing and the distant, taunting clamor of the enemy. The conflict was now twofold: a relentless physical assault from beyond the door, and the far more insidious psychological terror of what lay in the absolute silence below their feet. Every dwarf present knew the full history of this place, and the fear of awakening a deeper, older shadow was a weight as tangible as their armor. Faced with this dire trap, Balin made a decision rooted more in dwarven stubbornness than in military reality. He ordered a desperate defense, a holding action. His command was to guard that door with their lives, to buy time for a messenger to slip out and carry a plea for help to their kin in the lonely mountain. It was a strategy built on a fragile hope, a belief that their distant cousins would somehow hear their call and march across hundreds of miles of dangerous wilderland in time. The stakes in that sealed chamber could not have been higher. The survival of every single dwarf of the expedition was now on the line. Their failure would mean more than just their own end. It would prove to all dwarven kind that Moria was not just lost, but forever cursed, a dream that could never be reawakened. The siege was long, and hope began to dwindle with their supplies. Balin fell not in a grand last charge, but on a simple errand of hope. He had ventured to the eastern gate, seeking a glimpse of a clear path through the Dimril Dale, a chance for his people to break free. A single orc arrow, loosed from the high rocks, found its mark. The Lord of Moria fell silently, his body lying where it fell, beyond the reach of his kin. The news of his passing swept through the besieged dwarves like a final, chilling wind, extinguishing the last flicker of defiance in their hearts. Their leader was gone, their escape route was a fantasy, and the enemy's triumphant cries echoed from every wall. The brave attempt to reclaim their home had ended in a cruel echo of the ancient tragedy, a cycle of loss repeating itself with a terrible finality. What do you do when there is no hope left to fight for? The remaining dwarves, their numbers thinned and their spirits shattered, faced this stark reality. Their world had shrunk to the confines of the chamber of Mazarbul, a tomb they had built for their own fallen. In a decision of profound and somber symbolism, they made it their own. They gathered their remaining strength and sealed the great stone door from the inside, choosing the dignity of a final resting place together over the chaos of a slaughter in the open halls. This was not a strategic choice, but a ceremonial one, a final act of community in the face of absolute despair. The personal stakes of survival were gone, replaced by the quiet, terrible finality of their story's end. The last chapter of the dwarves in Moria was not written in glory or victory, but in the silent, shared acceptance of their fate. In the ensuing silence, the only thing that grew in the halls was shadow. The silence left by the dwarves did not last. Moria's vast emptiness became a siren call for the scattered evils of the Misty Mountains. Orcs and cave trolls, creatures of greed and destruction, seeped into the grand halls like a foul stain. They did not build or craft, they defiled. Delicate stonework was smashed to make way for crude fortifications. Ancient forges, cold for centuries, were lit only to hammer out jagged weapons. The kingdom's profound beauty was forgotten, buried under layers of filth and the harsh, guttural tongue of its new inhabitants. Its very name, once spoken with awe, became a whisper of dread on the lips of all travelers. This was no longer a lost kingdom, but an active blight upon the land. The great east-west pass, a vital artery of Middle-earth, was now severed by this poisoned heart. To journey near the mountains was to risk being waylaid by raiding parties that poured from hidden exits, turning a route of commerce into a gauntlet of fear. The conflict shifted from a grand, internal tragedy to a relentless, external threat. The darkness within the mountain was no longer content to sleep. It had grown teeth and claws, and it looked outward. Faced with this festering wound on their border, The rulers of the neighboring elven realm of Lothlorien made a momentous decision. The Lady Galadriel and Lord Celeborn knew that to march an army into those deep halls was to invite a catastrophic war in tight, dark spaces where their own strengths would be nullified. Instead, they chose a path of solemn vigilance. They posted silent guards along the western borders and wove unseen wards of power, a magical net to contain the corruption. This was not a choice born of fear, but of profound wisdom, a recognition that some evils are best contained, not confronted. The stakes for all free peoples were now the security of their own homes. Allowing the shadow in Moria to grow, unchecked, risked it spilling out like a plague, threatening the fragile peace of the entire region. Every orc that went unchallenged, every tunnel that was left unexplored, made the world outside a little more dangerous. Yet, deep below the clamor of the orcs and the watchfulness of the elves, the original terror waited, patient and undiminished by the centuries. A new guardian claimed the western approach, a creature as old as the mountains themselves. While orcs and trolls infested the upper halls, something far more ancient and unknowable was drawn from lightless depths by the shadow festering within the mountain. It settled in the dark waters of the lake before the west gate, a mass of writhing tentacles and patient malice that the outside world would come to call the watcher in the water. Its arrival was a quiet, terrible event, sealing the fate of the last known entrance with a finality that stone and rubble alone could not achieve. This was no mere beast, but a being of profound darkness, a sentinel for the horrors within. The once proud gate, a masterpiece of elven script and dwarven craft, now had a living, breathing lock. Any who sought to enter from the west would first have to cross its domain, turning a journey of remembrance into a desperate struggle for survival. The creature did not hunt for food, but for the despair of intruders, its tentacles rising from the murk to snatch away hope as easily as it snatched bodies. The orcs within seemed to understand this new arrangement, giving the lake a wide berth. It was as if the various evils of the mountain had reached a silent, terrible accord, each horror occupying its own niche in a perfectly balanced ecosystem of dread. The stakes for any future expedition were now exponentially higher. To even reach the door required passing this first physical trial, a test of nerve against a monster that could drag a whole company into the icy deep. The beautiful doors, once a symbol of friendship between two great peoples, had become the jaws of a trap. The choice before them was impossible. On one side lay the high pass, watched by the winged spies of Saruman, a path of certain capture. On the other stood the silent, menacing mountain, a tomb that held a history of fire and shadow. For Gimli the dwarf, this was no choice at all. His voice, usually a rumble of confidence, softened with a longing so deep it seemed to echo from the stone itself. He spoke of the unquiet memory of his people, of the glittering halls and endless pillars he had only ever known in song. To him, this was not a tomb, but a home he had been denied his entire life, a chance to walk where Durin himself had walked, and to see if any spark of the old glory remained. His hope was a bright, fragile flame in the gathering dusk. Gandalf the wizard stood as a counterpoint to that hope, his own spirit heavy with a dread knowledge. He knew the name of the shadow that slept below, and he understood that to enter was to risk waking a power that could shatter their quest before it had truly begun. His fear was not for himself, but for the fragile ring-bearer and the future of all their lands. The internal conflict was a silent war fought in the space between heartbeats, a struggle between Gimli's ancestral yearning and Gandalf's terrible foresight. The decision was made for them by the lake. The Watcher in the water, that ancient sentinel of the deep, erupted from the murky water in a frenzy of writhing tentacles. It was not merely attacking, it was hurting them, its cold intelligence forcing them toward the very doors they feared to open. With the creature blocking all retreat, the certain danger of the pass was replaced by the unknown terror of the mountain. Gandalf, faced with this immediate, overwhelming threat, made the only choice left. He would lead them into the dark. The stakes of their entire mission were now tied to the fate of this lost kingdom. Failure within these halls would mean more than their own end. It would mean the Ring of Power would fall to the enemy, and all hope for Middle-earth would be extinguished forever. With a heavy heart, Gandalf sought the hidden key to the moonlit doors. The world beyond the door vanished into an absolute, suffocating dark. Gandalf's staff cast a small, defiant pool of white light, but it only made the surrounding blackness feel heavier, a physical presence that pressed in on them from all sides. Their footsteps, even when softened by caution, echoed for what seemed like miles in the vast, empty halls. This was not a quiet of peace, but of death, a silence that had swallowed the clamor of thousands, and now seemed to be listening to their every breath. Gimli walked as if in a trance, his usual robust confidence replaced by a quiet, trembling reverence. He reached out to touch the cold, smooth pillars they passed, his fingers tracing grooves cut by his ancestors. He was not seeing a tomb, but a ghost of a home, and the grief on his face was a more powerful testament to the loss than any ruined forge could ever be. The air itself was thick with memory and dust, and every shadow at the edge of their light seemed to hold the shape of a fallen dwarf. The company's strategy was reduced to its most basic form: move quickly and make no sound. There were no debates, no discussions. Their survival depended on being phantoms in this haunted place, on leaving no trace of their passage for the mountain's current inhabitants to find. Every footfall, every rustle of a cloak felt like a betrayal. They stuck to the main avenues, their eyes straining against the gloom, knowing that any side passage could be a lair, any alcove an archer's nest. The tension was a wire stretched taut in the silence, humming with the unspoken fear that the next corner would be their last. This was a lesson in scale, a humbling reminder that even the greatest works of mortals could be hollowed out and reclaimed by a patient darkness. The stakes of their quest felt magnified here, dwarfed by the sheer, oppressive weight of this fallen kingdom. They were not just carrying a ring, they were carrying the fragile light of the present into the heart of a past defeat. Then they found the chamber of Mazarbul. The great stone door was broken, hanging askew on its hinges, and within lay the final, heartbreaking answer to the fate of Balin's colony. It was not a battlefield, but a tomb, a silent room where the dead had been laid to rest before hope itself had perished. The sight of the dwarven skeletons, the scattered, rusted weapons, and the crumbling pages of a lost journal told a story more terrible than any orcish shriek. It was in this chamber, surrounded by the evidence of a hope that had flickered and died, that their flight turned into a fight. The silence of the tomb shattered as a crude, rusty spear clattered against the stone door. In an instant, the chamber of Mazarbul was no longer a place of remembrance, but a killing ground. flooded with a tide of orcs, whose guttural cries echoed off the ancient walls. The Fellowship was caught in a trap, their backs to a dead end, with the history of this very room a grim prophecy of their potential fate. Aragorn and Boromir moved as one, their swords a blur of steel as they barred the doorway with their own bodies. Their tactical decision was immediate and instinctual, to create a choke point where their skill could counter the enemy's overwhelming numbers. Every parry and thrust was a calculated effort to protect the ring bearer and the others huddled behind them. The conflict was brutally intimate, a chaotic press of snarling faces and jagged blades in the tight confines of the chamber. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, iron, and foul breath, a sensory overload of violence. Then came the cave troll. It lumbered into the room, a mountain of muscle and thick hide, its chain and hammer scattering dwarven bones like twigs. The Fellowship's unity was tested to its absolute limit as they swarmed the beast, their attacks seeming to barely scratch its armored skin. In the fray, the troll's massive spear found a target, driving into Frodo's chest with a sickening force that sent him crashing against the wall. For a heart-stopping moment, the quest seemed over before it had truly begun. The loss of the ring bearer an unthinkable catastrophe. But then, Frodo gasped. The wind knocked from him, but his life intact. The ancient Mithril shirt, a treasure born from the very heart of Khazad-dûm, had turned the lethal blow into a painful bruise. The legacy of the mountain had, in its final hour, protected its unlikely heir. The stakes in that frantic battle were not about glory or victory, but the bare essentials of survival. The fall of any single member would have shattered their fragile fellowship and doomed their world-saving mission. As the last orcs fell and the survivors fell back, a heavy, panting silence returned to the chamber. But it was a silence that did not last. From the deep, dark mines below, a new sound began to echo, a slow, deliberate drumbeat that was far older and far more terrible than the clamor of battle. That sound was not of this age. It began not as a noise in the air, but as a vibration deep within the stone itself, a slow, resonant boom that traveled up through the soles of their feet. It was a drumbeat of the earth, ancient and terrible, and it spoke of a power that remembered the world's breaking. Every instinct told them to freeze, to hide, but Gandalf's voice cut through the paralyzing dread like a whip crack. "Run," he commanded. "Run for the bridge of Khazad-dûm. There is no other path for us now." The conflict was no longer about fighting. It was a pure, unadulterated race for survival, a test of their will against a shadow that was slowly, deliberately beginning to stir. The stakes had been utterly transformed. They were not merely fleeing orcs. They were fleeing a legend, a demon from the first dawn that had lain in wait for 500 years. Their flight through the 21st hall was a blur of panic and pounding hearts. The grand pillars became a terrifying forest they had to navigate, every shadow a potential ambush, every echo a herald of their end. The air grew hot and thick, carrying the scent of old ash and a new, suffocating heat that had nothing to do with any forge. Behind them, the darkness began to pulse with a deep, ruddy glow, as if the mountain's heart were igniting. The drumbeats did not quicken, but their terrible rhythm was a countdown, each boom marking a moment closer to an end they could not outrun. What do you do when the very stone beneath you becomes the voice of your doom? You run until your lungs burn and your legs scream, because the only alternative is a fire that does not consume, but utterly unmakes. The fellowship ran as one, a single organism of fear and hope, driven forward by the wizard's desperate command and the closing heat at their backs. The demon of the ancient world stepped onto the bridge. It was a vision of primal ruin, a being of shadow and flame that made the very air shudder. Its presence was a physical weight, a heat that dried the throat, and a terror that froze the heart. Gandalf the Grey stood alone against it, his staff a single, defiant star in that overwhelming darkness. His choice was absolute, a conscious acceptance of a fate he had long feared. He would be the barrier between his friends and the end of all things. This was not a battle of strength, but a final, desperate act of guardianship. The fate of the ring, and of every soul in the fellowship, hinged on the moments he could buy them. "You cannot pass," he declared, and his voice was not a shout, but a command woven into the fabric of the world itself. The Balrog answered with a roar that shook dust from the cavern roof, and it raised its whip of fire. The struggle was a clash of fundamental opposites, the wisdom of light against the mindless hunger of the void. Gandalf did not seek to destroy the creature, for he knew that was beyond his power in that place. His goal was to break its path. He slammed his staff upon the bridge, and with a sound like a mountain cracking, the stone beneath the Balrog's feet gave way. The creature fell, its fire seeming to drown in the abyss below. But as it fell, its whip of thongs and flame lashed upward, coiling around the wizard's knees with a searing grip. The victory was instant, and so was the loss. Gandalf clung to the crumbling ledge, his fingers slipping as the terrible weight pulled him down. His final words were not of fear, but of instruction, a last thread of guidance for the friends he would never see again. "Fly, you fools," and then he was gone, following his enemy into the deep, silent dark. The fellowship staggered from the east gate, their bodies trembling and their minds numb. They had escaped the mountain, but they had left their heart and their guide within its stone. The sunlight felt alien and harsh, a world remade without the wisdom that had brought them this far. They were free, but they were lost, carrying forward a quest that had just claimed its most terrible price. The sunlight on the eastern slopes felt like a mockery. They huddled on the rocks, their bodies trembling not from the cold, but from the hollow, aching void left in Gandalf's wake. The world had been saved, but their small fellowship felt utterly broken. Legolas stood motionless, his elven eyes fixed on the mountain, as if he could will the stone to give back their guide. Gimli sat with his head in his hands, his proud shoulders slumped in a grief too profound for words. The hobbits wept openly, their small forms shaking with sobs they could no longer contain. In that moment of absolute despair, the quest felt over. The heart had been torn from their company, and the ring's burden seemed to grow heavier with every ragged breath. Aragorn felt the weight of their sorrow as a physical pressure. His own heart was a stone in his chest, mourning the friend and mentor he had followed for so many long years. To stop now, to give in to the grief, would be to let Gandalf's ultimate sacrifice be for nothing. The conflict between his own sorrow and his unspoken duty was a war fought in the silence of his soul. He could not bring their wizard back, but he could honor his final command. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and firm, a thread of steel in the emotional chaos. "We must go on," he told them. "We cannot linger here." His decision was not a denial of their pain, but a choice to carry it with them, to let grief fuel their resolve rather than extinguish it. He was forcing them, and himself, to trade mourning for motion. This was the first true test of their endurance, a challenge not of muscle or sword, but of spirit. The stakes were no longer about orcs or dark lords, but about the resilience of hope itself. Could this battered group, now leaderless and heartbroken, find the strength to take the next step, and the one after that? Their ability to recover from this loss would determine the fate of all their lands. Aragorn's leadership, in that moment, was not about giving orders, but about offering a direction for their pain. He pointed away from the dark mountain, towards the golden woods of Lothlorien that lay ahead, a promised sanctuary, and so they moved, a quiet, sorrowful procession, each step a silent tribute to the friend they had left behind. The memory of the falling shadow followed them like a ghost, a chill that even the warm sunlight could not dispel. The echo of the axe fell silent in the mountains for good. In the years that followed, the dwarves of Erebor and the Iron Hills turned their energies inward, fortifying the halls they still held. Their decision was a quiet, collective one, born from a grief too profound to risk again. Moria was no longer a home to be won back, but a sacred tomb, a place of memory best left to its own haunted silence. The ambition to reclaim it was finally extinguished, replaced by a solemn focus on preserving what remained of their people and their culture. The conflict was no longer fought with picks and axes, but within the heart of every dwarf who heard the old songs. They cherished the glorious tales of the endless city, yet lived with the undeniable truth of its dark and cursed present. This tension between a magnificent past and a painful reality became a permanent thread in the fabric of their identity. The cultural stakes were immense, a delicate balancing act of honoring their history without being poisoned by the bitterness of its loss. Their stories and songs became the new stronghold, the vessel in which the true essence of Khazad-dûm was kept safe. In the quiet of a royal hall in Erebor, an old dwarf might still speak of the Arkenstone, that great jewel of the lonely mountain. And listening, others would nod knowingly, for they understood in their hearts that the true gem of their people, its brightest light and deepest sorrow, was forever lost in the dark of Khazad-dûm. That mithril coat, a whisper of silver in the dark, became Frodo's second skin. It was a secret strength, a legacy of a kingdom's greatest craft, carried unseen beneath the simple cloth of a hobbit. When the cave troll's spear drove into his chest in the chamber of Mazarbul, the force of the blow should have shattered him, yet the mail did not break. It sang a silent, defiant note, a final echo of the forges of Khazad-dûm, and turned a killing thrust into a painful bruise. This was not its only service. Later, in a desperate skirmish, an orc arrow that would have found a fatal home was instead turned aside by the hidden weave of true silver. The coat was more than armor. It was a covenant, a promise from a lost people to the future. Its value was no longer counted in the priceless ore from which it was made, but in the simple, profound fact of Frodo's continued breath. Every time it saved him, it was a small victory for the memory of the dwarves, a flicker of their enduring will in a world growing ever darker. Yet, to wear such a treasure was to carry a profound and quiet sorrow. The shirt was a direct, physical link to the Balrog's fire and the fall of a king. Its cool, impossibly light weight on Frodo's shoulders was a constant reminder of the immense cost paid for the beauty and power it represented. He bore the protection it offered, but he also bore the weight of its history, a duality that followed him on every step of his weary journey. The choice to accept and use this gift, first made by Bilbo and then by his heir, was an act of profound trust. It was an acknowledgement that the tools of the past, even those born from tragedy, could be wielded for the salvation of the present. For Frodo, the personal stakes were a matter of life and death, his survival intrinsically tied to this artifact. The shirt became a direct, physical manifestation of aid from a fallen civilization in the fight against the growing shadow. Thus, even in its utter abandonment, the deepest skill of Khazad-dûm continued to aid the world, its final masterpiece, ensuring that the one who carried the world's burden would not fall to a random blade or a stray arrow. The War of the Ring finally ended, but for Gimli, son of Gloin, the deepest battle was just beginning. It was a quiet war fought in his own heart, a struggle between the ghost of a mountain home and the promise of a new dawn. His love for the lost glory of Moria was a part of him, as fundamental as the strength in his hands, yet he carried the searing memory of its fall, a lesson written in fire and shadow. He could spend his remaining years singing only songs of lament for what was gone, or he could take up a new hammer and build. The future of his people rested on this choice, on whether they could learn from the tragedy of delving too deep and find a different kind of strength. His decision came not in a grand hall, but amidst the aftermath of a great battle, in the very place where he had fought alongside men. He looked upon the glittering caves of Helm's Deep, not with a miner's greed for what lay within, but with an artist's eye for the beauty that was already there. The caverns were a natural cathedral of crystal and light, where water and stone had worked in harmony for millennia to create a wonder that needed no dwarven pick to improve, only to be honored and protected. He would not build another Khazad-dûm, a kingdom turned inward upon its own dark treasures. He would found a Glarond, the glittering caverns, a realm founded on light and open friendship. This new settlement would be a testament to a different kind of dwarven valor, one measured not in the depth of their delves, but in the height of their alliances and the brilliance they brought forth into the open world. The stakes for this venture were nothing less than the soul of his people. Success would prove that the dwarves could forge a new legacy, one untainted by the shadow of greed, ensuring their culture would thrive in a new age. Failure to embrace this new path would mean being forever chained to a past of loss, their greatest songs forever echoing in empty halls. Gimli chose to look forward. He led a colony of dwarves to those radiant caves, and there they worked in a new spirit. They crafted gates that welcomed the light, not barred it out. They built in partnership with the men of Rohan, their forges and farms supporting one another in a shared prosperity. And in the halls of a Glarond, new songs were sung alongside the old. But the stone never forgot. For a dwarf, the earth is not a silent thing. We possess a sense beyond sight or sound, a deep resonance with the living rock we call the stone sense. It is a feeling in the bones, a hum in the blood, a way of knowing the age and integrity of a mountain by the mere press of a palm against its flank. And in the bones of the Misty Mountains, every dwarf can feel a permanent, sorrowful vibration, a low and constant echo of the moment Khazad-dûm fell. It is a ghost limb of a lost home, an ache for a place that no longer exists, yet one we can never truly leave behind. This creates a quiet, relentless conflict within every one of us. How do you build a new life in the Iron Hills, or sing a joyful song in the halls of Erebor, when the very bedrock of the world is humming a dirge only you can hear? The desire to move forward, to thrive in the present, is perpetually tugged by this sensory memory of our greatest tragedy. The emotional stakes in this quiet struggle are immense, touching the psychological well-being of our entire race. To be consumed by this sorrow is to live as a ghost in your own skin, forever chained to a moment of fire and loss. Yet to ignore it completely is to sever a part of our own soul, to deny the very sense that defines us. So we have learned, over long and difficult years, to walk a different path. We learn to acknowledge the hum of sorrow without letting it become the only song we know. We incorporate the memory of the fall into our identity, wearing it not as an open wound, but as a sober reminder of the cost of hubris. It becomes a part of our craft, lending a touch of solemn beauty to our saddest melodies and our most resilient metalwork. This deep connection to the stone meant that while the kingdom was dead to the world above, it was never truly silent to its children. Even now, travelers on the high passes sometimes pause, their breath catching in their chests. They report a strange phenomenon, a sound that is not the wind or falling rock, but something far more unsettling. It is the faint, rhythmic echo of a hammer striking an anvil, a ghostly cadence of industry that seems to rise from the very roots of the mountain. These whispers from the deep are not the clamor of orcs or the beat of war drums, but the patient, persistent ring of a craftsman at work. For those who hear it, the sound sparks a powerful legend, a story that the spirits of the dwarven smiths are not at rest, but are forever bound to their forges, repeating the glorious labors of their golden age. Some even say the mountain itself remembers, that the stone has absorbed the memory of that great civilization and now plays it back, like a forgotten song trapped within the rock. This creates a deep and poignant tension between the rational mind and the hopeful heart. A geologist might explain it as the shifting of tectonic plates, or the groan of ancient stone settling over millennia. But for the descendants of Durin, and for any who carry the old stories, the explanation is not so simple. It feels like a call, a thread of memory that defies all logic. The wise, like Lord Elrond of Rivendell, counsel sternly against any investigation. They see these echoes not as an invitation, but as a perilous lure, a siren song woven from equal parts shadow and longing. To follow the sound is to risk everything. It could be a trap set by the residual malice that still clings to the minds, a way to draw the curious to their doom. Or, perhaps more dangerously, it could spark a fatal obsession, a consuming need to find the source of the echo that would blind a seeker to all other dangers within those dark halls. The stakes for an individual are nothing less than their life and their sanity, a gamble against forces of memory and shadow that have outlasted entire ages. So the mountain stood, a silent tomb and a living memorial, its deepest truths and its echoing whispers known only to the unfeeling stone. A deep silence filled the space after the last echo of the mountain faded. Bofar, the Lormaster, felt the weight of it settle upon him. He had recounted the fire, the fall, and the long, sorrowful flight. The story of Khazad-dûm was in its final chapters, a tale of ash and shadow. But now, as he looked upon his listeners, he felt a profound responsibility stir within him. To end the history here, on that note of absolute loss, felt like a betrayal of the very memory he had sworn to uphold. The truth of the end was undeniable, yet a story that concluded only in despair could crush the spirit, leaving no room for the awe that was the kingdom's birthright. He wrestled with this duty, this power to shape how a civilization would be remembered, should its legacy be defined solely by its tragic end, or by the millennia of breathtaking achievement that came before. The internal conflict was a quiet, fierce one, a battle between the historian's cold facts and the storyteller's warm heart. He made his choice. He would not let the shadow have the final word. And so, he turned his voice away from the blackness of the tomb and back toward the light. He would speak of the Hall of Kings, not as a silent, dusty cavern, but as it was in its prime, a vision of living stone. He painted the scene with his words, describing how the light from 1,000 braziers would catch on the mithril inlay of the pillars, making the very air seem to shimmer with captured starlight. He spoke of the deep, resonant songs that would echo through the vast space, not songs of war, but of lineage and craft, each note a thread in the tapestry of their people. This was not a denial of the fall, but a conscious act of healing, a decision to define a thing by its life, not its death. The stakes were the hearts of those who heard him. A story that remembered only the darkness could inspire fear and sorrow, but a story that resurrected, even for a moment, the glory and the community could inspire resilience and wonder. He chose to gift them the memory of the forges at their peak, the great bellows breathing like a sleeping dragon, the rhythmic, harmonious ring of 100 hammers shaping metal, not for war, but for beauty. And as he spoke of that steady, industrious sound, the rhythm of it became a gentle, comforting pulse, a lullaby of creation to soothe the ache of loss. The steady rhythm of the imagined hammer strokes began to slow, becoming more distant. The sound was like a great, sleeping heart beating deep within the mountain, a patient and constant pulse. Now let us drift closer to the forges themselves, not as cold, empty chambers, but as living centers of warmth and purpose. The air here is thick with the scent of hot stone and clean, burning coal. The great bellows breathe in a slow, deep rhythm, a soft whoosh of air that fuels the central fires without frenzy. It is a sound of constant, gentle exhalation, as reliable as the tide. And then, the hammers, they do not fall in chaos, but in a harmonious cadence, a chorus of precise, ringing notes. Each strike is a clear, resonant tone that sings through the hall, shaping the glowing metal not with violence, but with a master's tender care. The hot steel sings back, a high, pure chime that answers each blow. When the white-hot blade is finally quenched, it does not scream, but sighs. A long, soft hiss of steam rises from the water trough, a cloud that carries away the final heat and leaves behind perfection. This is the true music of Khazad-dûm, a lullaby of industry, where every action is part of a greater, peaceful order. Bafar chooses these sounds with deliberate care, his voice softening to match their gentle tempo. He weaves the warmth of the fires and the orderly dance of the smiths into a tapestry for the mind, a sanctuary built from memory. His craft as a storyteller is not to incite excitement, but to offer solace. He guides his listeners away from the sharp edges of history and into its deep, resonant calm. The stakes are the quiet of your own mind, A story well told should be a gift of rest, not a burden of sorrow. It should replace the day's clutter with visions of magnificent, tranquil halls, where every sound is a promise of creation and peace. The last, faint ring of the hammer fades into a gentle echo, leaving behind a profound and comforting silence. That gentle, rhythmic pulse of the forges now begins to slow, its steady beat softening into a quiet, resting tempo. Watch now as the great central fires of the grand smithies bank themselves, the roaring flames sinking into beds of glowing embers that breathe a soft, orange warmth into the vast halls. One by one, the countless lamps that line the endless avenues start to dim. Their golden light, which once pushed back the mountain's eternal night, now recedes with a slow and deliberate grace. It is not the sudden darkness of a snuffed candle, but the gradual, peaceful dimming of a realm that has earned its rest. The crystals set high in the vaulted ceilings, which once shone with captured starlight, now let their brilliance fade, returning the stone to its natural, quiet state. This is the kingdom itself settling, a great being sighing contentedly as it prepares for a long and untroubled sleep. Any lingering worries you carry, any tightness in your shoulders or busyness in your thoughts, can be released with this fading light. There is no danger here in this gentle dark, only the profound safety of a story completed, a watch ended. As the Lormaster, my final act is not one of drama, but of care. I guide this memory of a mighty civilization, not toward a climax of fire and shadow, but toward the quiet peace of a blanket drawn up against the chill. I am, in a sense, tucking the entire kingdom into its own stony bed, ensuring its dreams are of pillars and poetry, not of loss. The only thing left to win tonight is your own deep and restoring slumber. The last light in the deepest hall flickered once, a final, soft blink against the dark, holding not a trace of fear, but the gentle, certain promise of dawn, waiting on the other side of a long and peaceful rest. The true power of a story lies not in its most terrible moment, but in the telling that follows. Bofar understood this, not as a scholar, but as a guardian of hearts. He had recounted the fire and the fall, the undeniable truth of Durin's bane. Yet to let the narrative end there, in that echoing silence after Gandalf's fall, felt like a final betrayal of the very people he sought to honor. A tale that concludes only in despair offers no shelter for the spirit, so he made a choice, a quiet act of profound defiance against the long shadow of grief. He would not grant the Balrog the final word. His voice, which had trembled with the heat of ancient fires, now softened, becoming a gentle instrument of reclamation. He deliberately turned the listener's ear away from the roar of the demon and toward the enduring hum of the forges in their prime. This was the story's true climax, a battle fought not with steel, but with memory, where the weapon was a soothing tone and the victory was a reclaimed legacy. He would transform a saga of catastrophic loss into a lullaby of resilience. In his telling, the greed that drove the delves too deep was not forgotten, but it was framed as a single, painful chapter in a much longer book of breathtaking achievement. The true essence of his people was not their tragic error, but their millennia of patient creation, their unbreakable bond with the stone, their songs that filled grand halls with meaning. This reframing was an act of deep cultural healing. It ensured that the name Khazad-dûm would evoke not just a tomb, but a testament to what hands and hearts can build together. For the listener, this shift is a gift. It replaces the tension of a looming threat with the profound peace of a craftsman's rhythmic hammer, the warmth of a well-tended forge, the safety of a community at work. Bofar offers not a history lesson, but a sanctuary built from sound and sentiment, allowing the mighty kingdom and all who remember it to finally find their rest in the gentle embrace of a story well told. Its echoes now settle into the quiet of the night, a story fully told. Bofar has fulfilled his sacred duty as a Lormaster, not by leaving you with the sting of loss, but by reframing the entire Dwarven legacy. He has guided you through the soaring grandeur and the profound grief, ensuring the final memory is not one of a kingdom falling, but of a people who built wonders that echoed for ages. You are left not with a warning, but with a testament, a monument in the mind to what hands and hearts can achieve when they work in harmony with the stone. This is the deep, historical peace that follows a great story, a feeling that the struggles and triumphs of the past have settled into their rightful place, adding their weight and wisdom to the foundation of the world. The rhythmic sounds of the forges and the gradual fading of the lights were not just details, but a gentle, deliberate invitation. They were a bridge from the waking world into the realm of dreams, where your own thoughts can now wander through those majestic, silent halls under the mountain. There are no more battles to be fought there, no more shadows to flee. In this dreamed memory of Khazad-dûm, the only thing that remains is the enduring peace of stone and memory, a vast and tranquil sanctuary where the soul can find its rest. The great tale is complete, and its quiet is a gift.